I want you to close your eyes and picture the American pioneer woman. Hollywood has trained us to see a stoic, iron-willed matriarch, a woman who crossed deserts in a covered wagon, fought off wild animals with a frying pan, and built a nation with her bare hands, never shedding a tear. For years, I believed that myth. But when I started digging into the actual coroner's reports and apothecary ledgers of the 1800s, I found a completely different frontier. I found a frontier that was largely settled by housewives who were heavily, legally, and chronically sedated. Step inside any frontier pharmacy in 1870, and you wouldn't just find bandages and whiskey. You would find shelves lined with dark amber glass bottles promising to cure women's melancholia, hysteria, and the vapors. Inside those bottles was a dark, reddish-brown liquid called laudanum. It was a potent tincture consisting of 10% powdered opium dissolved in 90% pure grain alcohol. It was legal. It required no prescription. And it was, for all intents and purposes, the housewife's heroin. Let's look at the biological forensics. When a woman swallowed a spoonful of laudanum, the opium bypassed the digestive tract and went straight to work on the brain's mu-opioid receptors. It didn't just suppress physical pain, it radically numbed emotional distress, inducing a heavy, floating euphoria. And it was shockingly cheap. Because the British Empire was flooding the global market with opium, a bottle of laudanum actually cost less than a bottle of beer or gin. This made it the absolute drug of choice for the working and middle class. If you had a toothache, laudanum. A bad cough, laudanum. But its most sinister application was pediatric. As Dr. Volney Steele points out in his extensive medical history, Bleed, Blister, and Purge, pioneer medicine was largely about symptom management, not cures. Families undertaking the brutal 6-month journey across the Oregon Trail faced screaming, terrified infants suffering from dysentery. The solution was soothing syrups. Mothers regularly dosed their babies with sweet-tasting, opium-laced tonics to keep them quiet in the back of the wagon. The babies fell into a deep, silent sleep. But tragically, some of those babies never woke up, dying of respiratory depression while their parents thought they were just resting. So, who was the typical 19th century drug addict? If you guess a saloon-brawling cowboy or a hardened outlaw, you'd be wrong. In his groundbreaking book, Dark Paradise, historian David T. Courtwright proved through medical censuses that the average opiate addict in the late 1800s was a white, middle-class, or upper-class woman. We actually see a brilliant, historically accurate depiction of this in pop culture. Think of the character Alma Garrett in HBO's Deadwood. She is a wealthy, refined woman from New York who arrives in a filthy, violent gold mining camp. To cope with the mud, the smell of unwashed bodies, and the sheer brutality of her surroundings, she drinks laudanum. It is her chemical shield against a terrifying world. But out on the Great Plains, the addiction took on a darker necessity. It was a coping mechanism for Prairie Madness. Women were often left alone in 10 by 10 foot dirt sod houses for weeks while their husbands hunted or traded. They were surrounded by an ocean of flat grass, listening to the relentless, howling wind. They buried children who died of cholera in shallow graves right outside their front doors. When these women went to doctors exhibiting severe trauma, grief, or depression, which the medical community dismissively labeled as hysteria, the doctors didn't have therapy, they had laudanum. They literally prescribed liquid opium to treat the psychological terror of frontier isolation. The societal double standard of the Wild West was brutal. Men were expected to drink whiskey and blow off steam in public saloons. But Victorian morality dictated that women had to remain pure, stoic, and confined to the domestic sphere. Drinking alcohol was strictly taboo for a proper lady, but taking medicine in the privacy of your own bedroom, that was perfectly acceptable. This created an invisible epidemic. Hundreds of thousands of women became heavily chemically dependent. And the withdrawals were catastrophic. If a blizzard hit and the supply wagon didn't make it to town, these women were thrown into sudden opiate withdrawal. The biological reality of opium detox is a nightmare. Bone-crushing muscle aches, violent tremors, cold sweats, and severe diarrhea. On a frontier without clean water or IV fluids, the dehydration caused by withdrawal wasn't just painful, it was often a death sentence. By the time the Civil War ended, the invention of the hypodermic needle and the synthesis of morphine poured gasoline on the fire. Women weren't just drinking it anymore. Doctors were leaving morphine kits in homes, teaching housewives how to inject themselves to manage female complaints. It wasn't until the turn of the 20th century that the federal government realized the staggering scale of the generational devastation. In 1906, after years of investigative journalism exposing the lethal contents of these patent medicines, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. For the very first time in American history, companies were legally forced to list the active ingredients on their labels. Women looked at their daily nerve tonics and realized, to their horror, that they had been drinking pure narcotics for decades. The final nail in the coffin came in 1914 with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. This law strictly regulated the distribution of opiates, effectively ending the era of over-the-counter heroin. The legislation was meant to save the country, but for the pioneer women already caught in the grip of the drug, it was a sudden, violent cutoff. We like to think the West was won by grit, iron, and righteous determination. But the forensic truth is far more uncomfortable. When the laws changed in 1914, thousands of pioneer women, stranded in isolated farmhouses and dusty frontier towns, had their medicine bottles taken away. And they were left to detox from a heroin-level addiction, entirely alone in the dark. Before we close this case, I want to share exactly where this research came from. If you want to dig deeper into the forensic reality we covered today, I highly recommend reading Dark Paradise: A History of Opiate Addiction in America by David T. Courtwright. It completely rewrote my understanding of who the real addicts of the 19th century actually were. For a raw look at the terrifying day-to-day reality of frontier doctors and their soothing syrups, Dr. Volney Steele's book, Bleed, Blister, and Purge, was an absolute goldmine for this episode. The legal and legislative history was pulled directly from the historical congressional records of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act and the 1914 Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. I've listed all of these sources down in the description below so you can verify the history for yourself. Thanks for joining me in the archives. I'll see you in the next file.